Okay, so we're reviewing some of the preliminary material. We've just looked at, in JavaScript, a review of the basics. And now we're going to move on a little bit and look at arrays in JavaScript. Understanding of arrays is fairly fundamental, and particularly understanding how arrays are processed and the built-in features JavaScript has for processing arrays can save a lot of time if you're new to a language. So we start with array basics. We can declare variables, of course, using const, and variables will be declared each with a unique name and a value. It's possible also for us to declare variables that contain multiple values, and at their simplest, this is what an array is. So here I'm declaring an array of 5 numbers, an array of a few strings, an empty array, and all we need to do to declare arrays in JavaScript is just introduce the 2 square brackets and enclose the values. We can access arrays using the subscript syntax. So here I'm declaring an array of 3 values and outputting them. And you can also access arrays using expressions. So in this example here, we are indexing into an array using an arithmetic expression. Arrays always start at 0, and they can be variable in length. Some examples of assigning values: I can put -100 into position 0, and apparently I can put string into position 2 in this example here. So I seem to be able to put in quite a variety of values directly into these simple 3-element array. If we wish to augment an array, we can add values at the end. So in this example, I have an array containing 3 values. 3 values are numbered 1, 2, and 3, contain the actual values. They're position 0, 1, and 2. And here I'm appending a new one, at position 3, putting in another value. The array will contain now 4 values at the end: 1, 2, 3, 4. We can also put values in apparently beyond the end of the array. So here's something a little bit strange. I have an array here with 3 values, numbers 1, 2, and 3 at position 0, 1, 2. And then I'm inserting a new value at position 5. And this seems to create a gap or a sparse element to the array. The array will now have 2 undefined values before we have the eventual string. An alternative way of adding to an array would be to use push. It's a little bit more convenient in the case that it will always append to the next available slot, not revealing any gaps in the array. So pushing a value here is a more simple way of extending the array rather than having to remember what the last index was. You can also remove elements from an array, and you can also shift elements around within an array. So if you want to make some space in the beginning of an array, you can call unshift, and this will insert the element in at the start of the array. It's kind of the opposite of push. Removing elements from an array, one way of doing it is to reset the length. So here I have reset array length 2. That reduces the size of the array from 3 elements to 2. More commonly, to remove an element from the array, we might call pop. Pop will remove the element from the end, and the array in this case will return from being 1, 2, 3 elements to being just 1, 2. Push and pop then are fairly common ways to insert and remove elements from an array in JavaScript. Here we're using shift, and this has the effect of removing an element from the front of the array. So it's the opposite of unshift, which we looked at just previously. And finally, delete. Delete allows us to remove an element from an array, but leaving the slot the element is holding in position. It's not probably usually what you want, but in the example here I've deleted element of position 1, which is here, and when I have deleted that element it's replaced with an undefined, the array still being effectively the same length. Okay, that's some of the basics. Let's just go on a little bit further and look at the methods. We've seen some of them already here. We've got an ability to find out the size of an array, and one way of doing that is to invoke the length attribute. Just to note that length is not a method, it is a field. So it's a little bit unusual. If you're thinking in terms of Java or maybe C++ collections, we have size and length methods in those collections. Here we have a length attribute without the brackets. Just bear that in mind. The other features that we're looking at now are all methods. They're all functions we can invoke. And if you're new to JavaScript, you might in certain circumstances end up writing features that are already implemented, particularly already implemented in arrays. So it's worth having a quick tour through, as I'm doing here, some of the methods that are built in. Slice makes a copy of an array. So we get a complete copy that's a separate array that we can use independently. So some examples there of slice in action. Concat appends one array to another, that is combines two arrays. So combine 1 is a concatenation of array 18 and array 19. So we get a combined array 1 to 6. Concat can be chained and can take multiple arrays. So here I'm combining 3 arrays into one. Any comma separated list can be concatenated into an array. So in this example here I'm concatenating what seems like just individual strings. The strings remain intact, but what I do get is an array containing all those values. Join joins 2 arrays together. When you invoke join, you're performing a joining of the array, and it's going to be flattened into a single array with a specific delimiter included as the separator. So you can see here I'm joining and passing this quotation here, which is being inserted directly into the array at these positions. So it's a useful feature, particularly when processing text. Index of, very useful. I can pass an expression and I get back the position of that element in the array if it is present. So here I'm testing to see is 2, 3, 1 in the array and what particular location they are in the array itself. If I'm looking for the element 10 in the array doesn't exist, then we get a -1 back. We can also use index of to locate arrays and strings in an array. So here I'm prompting the user for a string, and then I am seeing if I can find that string in the array. And if I can find a string in the array, then it means I've got a match in this instance. If I couldn't find the string, I'm reporting the fact that the string is not available. If there are more than one occurrence of an element in an array, we can find the last index. So index of finds the first, last index finds the last. Okay, so there are some useful functions you would want to be aware of, particularly index of and last index of. They're quite useful and they might save you having to write, for instance, simple linear search algorithms and the like. Speaking of linear search, let's talk a little bit now about array iteration. If we've got an array here of 6 numbers, 6 decimal numbers, and we want to apply rounding to each number, then we could invoke rounding on each element in turn. But of course, as you know from your programming experience, this is best handled by a loop. And a simple for loop would proceed to carry out the rounding for us. You can see the for loop here in JavaScript is identical really to its predecessor languages. It's the same in C, it's the same in C++, and it's the same in Java. While loops also, same structure inherited over, no variation really. And do while loop, you might recall those from Java. It's the same as a while loop really, except we're guaranteed to have one iteration. We can loop over strings. Here's a simple example, going through a string, and in this case we're looking at each individual character in the string. And we can also break out of a loop at any given point. Again, this is the same as it would be in the ancestor languages. This is a break here, which is going to exit out of the loop. Continue allows us to skip individual iterations. Again, we're skipping over one iteration of the loop here. But in general, it's considered not great practice to use break and continue inside loops. They tend to confuse the maintainer of the code, and they represent a bit of a disjunction really in how the control flow goes. So we'll be avoiding those features, just bringing them up as being present. Okay, arrays of strings then, because that's a special case, and we in general in web applications we're processing a lot of strings because we're dealing of course with user input. Here is an array of 3 strings, and if I log them out, they'll be printed out in my console, as you can see here. We've had some examples like this already. Here is a simple loop to go through the array and output each one in turn, and to also include the index of the element. Again, there's nothing surprising here, we're just familiar with this general structure. Here is another example, and this time the string array contains kind of a articulated values. We have the song followed by the composer. Song by composer. Song by composer in each instance. So if we're attempting to output that effectively, we might end up stepping through the array 2 elements at a time. Print out the song and title and artist, and then we increment, in this example, the counter by 2, and then we print out the next song and title. So the overall effect of this is we're printing out song and title, which is the first 2 elements, song and title, which is the second 2 elements, song and title, which is the third 2 elements. We're kind of tripping over ourselves here because we seem to be printing out the song number incorrectly. Instead of it being 0, 1, and 2, we're going 0, 2, and 4. We might be looking for a better way of doing that, and that's what we look at now. That is arrays of objects. Here is a revised array, and this one now looks a little bit different from what we've just seen. I've got an array of 3 elements, and each of those elements is an object, and each of those objects has 2 values, 2 attributes, artist and title. So it's a single object here in each of these elements, and a single object contains 2 fields, artist and title. We can now simplify how we would output this. So I want to print out the 3 songs, that's fine. Simple for loop. Notice that there's no attempt in the for loop to have to increment by 2, just proceeding one at a time. And then notice that I am accessing each individual object here directly. And weaving out the artist and the title in each instance. Here's a more extensive example, a playlist collection. And here now we've got quite an interesting compound object. Let's have a look at the pieces in it. Each one of these is an object consisting of ID, title, and songs. Here's a zooming in on that. ID and title are strings. Songs is an array. And that songs is an array of ID, title, and song again. ID, title, and artist, rather. So what we've got now is a playlist collection. And if we were to incorporate that into Chrome console, we would see 3 objects. Those 3 objects, if you can scan them, are object 1, which is the Beethoven sonatas, object 2, Beethoven concertos, object 3, Beethoven variations. When we output all 3 in our Chrome console, we'll be able to see those objects and delve into them to explore them in more detail. Here is an example of how we could, in a nested for loop, go in a little bit more detail into each of the objects. So I'm going through the collection, extracting each individual playlist, and then I'm going through each playlist and printing out each individual song. So this is a nested for loop here, which is traversing that data structure in a bit more depth. The output could be extended even further, and we could print out each individual element as we're doing. Okay, if we look at that then again, on the left we're seeing a playlist collection that we have created as an object in our Java source code. On the right here is, if we had been pasting this into the Chrome console, how it might look inside the debugger, inside Chrome itself. We've got very powerful debugging tools now in Chrome, and it's very easy for us to traverse and explore data structures in this context. Okay, that's a basic review of arrays and array iteration. I'd like to take now just a little look at arrays of objects, but we'll take a short break before we do that, so I'll be back with you very shortly.